In the quietest moments, when the noise of life has settled, you may suddenly notice a silent gaze watching you, not from the external world, but from the depths of the unconscious. There, a shadowy figure emerges, indistinct in face and form, yet heavy with presence. It is like a stranger suddenly appearing in a dream, sometimes a ragged beggar, sometimes a cold-blooded murderer, or simply a dark silhouette standing in the corner of a room, silent and motionless. This shadow unsettles the heart, for it bears the shape of something both deeply familiar and utterly alien, as if we had long ago disowned it. This is not a fanciful imagination. The shadow is the part of the soul that our ego refuses to acknowledge, dares not confront. And because it is imprisoned, it never disappears. It merely waits for a crack to slip into consciousness in dreams, in moments of weakness, or in a sudden outburst of anger. Meeting the shadow for the first time always brings a chilling sensation, but it is also the sign of a beginning, the opening of an inner journey, where the light of consciousness must step into the darkness to see itself clearly. When we take a step deeper into the realm of darkness, something strange happens. The shadow no longer appears merely as a stranger, but gradually reveals itself as a distorted mirror reflecting our own being. The things we despise in others, selfishness, greed, lust, weakness, are faintly glimpsed in that shadowy figure. And the painful truth is this: because we have denied these traits within ourselves, they now return, wearing the face of the other, to haunt and challenge us. In dreams, as I have said, the shadow often takes the form of someone of the same gender as the dreamer. If you are a man, your shadow may appear as a brutal Lazi or Pele man. If you are a woman, the shadow may manifest as a jealous, cruel, or contemptuous woman. But in truth, these are merely the parts exiled to the dungeon of the unconscious. This is the point where we often retreat, for confronting the shadow means confronting truths about ourselves. We do not wish to know. Society and the ego have taught us to wear a mask, persona, kind, strong, moral. But the shadow reveals the falsity of this, exposing our fragility, our secret désir, our suppressed anger. If we only deny it, the shadow will find ways to erupt in inexplicable anger, mental collapse, or in projecting evil onto others. But if we have the courage to look directly at it, the shadow becomes a stern teacher. It shows us you cannot be a complete ego without integrating the rejected parts in that space. Darkness is no longer merely a threat, but a gateway. It reminds us that the whole human being is not just light, but a composite of both light and darkness. And the journey of individuation is about learning to see the truth in the mirror, even if that truth makes us tremble. When the shadow has reflected our true face, the journey takes us further, into a land where the personal shadow merges with the shadow of all humanity. This is no longer a private matter. Every individual, every culture, every religion has encountered the darkness. The collective unconscious holds thousands of years of its symbols. The dragon in mythology, the devil in religion, the dark forces in fairy tales, in the dreams. Jung recorded the shadow often wears the guise of a monster, a demon, or a fearsome stranger. But these images are not meant to destroy the human being. They serve as reminders. The shadow is the primal, instinctual part where repressed strength awaits rebirth. Like the dragon guarding treasure in mythology, the darkness guards the seed of new life. To reclaim the gold, the hero must bravely face the dragon. This image appears everywhere. St. George slays the dragon to save the princess. Siegfried bathes in dragon's blood to become invulnerable. Or in Taoism, where darkness, yin, embraces light, yang, in the circle of the Tai Chi. This is the ancient language the collective unconscious uses to speak to us. There is no pure light without darkness, no salvation without the fall. If we do not acknowledge this, the shadow will rise beyond our control in wars, crimes, or collective brutality. But if we step into the myth as an inner hero, the darkness becomes the keeper of the gate to rebirth. This is why I said, those who look outward dream, those who look inward awaken. Darkness is not just fear, but the language of an ancient wisdom echoing within us. When we have passed through the gate guarded by the dragon, stepping into our own myth, the next stage is reconciliation with the shadow. This is not a simple act of defeating or eliminating the darkness, but a subtle process in which the shadow is transformed into creative strength. I emphasize that the darkness, if denied, becomes a dangerous enemy, but if acknowledged, it becomes a secret teacher. In many dreams, I have seen the image of a strange companion, half fearsome, half alluring, appearing to guide the way. This is the archetype of the guide, often hidden within the shadow. The guide shows us that every repressed energy, anger, lust, selfishness has a positive aspect, carrying a potential for life. For instance, anger, when understood and accepted, becomes the will to protect oneself. Lust, instead of being suppressed, can transform into a source of artistic creativity. Selfishness, when rightly placed, can become the ability to assert oneself. This is the alchemical process of the soul that I often liken to transforming the lead of darkness into the gold of new consciousness. In religion, this reconciliation appears as well. Christ descends into hell before his resurrection, or in Taoism, the practitioner integrates yin and yang to attain the Tao. All traditions speak the same truth. True light is found only after embracing the darkness. Psychologically, this is a challenging stage. We must learn to live with the shadow, allowing it to be present without overwhelming us. As I wrote, no one becomes enlightened by imagining light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is a lifelong task. For each time consciousness expands, the darkness takes on new forms for us to confront. This stage does not end, but opens a path. After reconciling with the shadow, we must move toward individuation, the journey of restructuring the entire soul, where the ego, the unconscious, and the archetypes converge to form a unified whole. When the shadow has been acknowledged and partially reconciled, the journey of the soul leads to the next threshold, the encounter with the anima and animus. These are the deepest archetypes in the collective unconscious. The inner images of femininity in a man, anima, and masculinity in a woman, animus. If the shadow is the gatekeeper, the anima, animus, is the guide into the sacred world of the unconscious. In dreams, the feminine in a man often appears as a mysterious woman, is sometimes beautiful, sometimes fearsome, carrying a charm that transcends reason. To me, she is the mediator with the divine, for the anima connects the human to the depths of the spiritual. Conversely, the masculine in a woman appears in the female psyche as a will or a collective of men, full of power, representing ideals and the capacity for reasoning. But sometimes, rigid and ruthless, this journey is fraught with challenges, for the anima and animus have two faces, light and darkness. When unconscious, they can draw us into enchantment, leading us into illusions of love or overwhelming us with prejudices and unrealistic ideals. But when recognized, they become inner guides, granting us access to the depths of our soul. In many mythologies, this encounter is reflected through images. Persephone descends to the underworld and returns as a goddess of rebirth, or Sophia, the goddess of wisdom in Christianity, who illuminates the lost soul. In alchemy, this is the stage of conjunctio oppositorum, the conjunction of opposites, where masculine and feminine, reason and emotion, consciousness and unconscious begin to intertwine psychologically. This is a turning point. A man learns to listen to his feminine side, intuition, emotion, receptivity. A woman learns to harmonize her masculine side, reason, strength, decisiveness. Only through this interplay can the ego mature and the soul advance toward individuation, the process of becoming oneself. Not merely the small ego, but a unified whole. But I warn, this is not the destination, only a doorway. After the anima and animus, we must confront the image of the self, the ultimate center of the soul, the symbol of wholeness. Individuation truly begins when the ego bows before the self, stepping into the endless journey of the soul. When the journey moves beyond the shadow and into the encounter with the masculine and feminine, the soul gradually approaches an invisible center that I call the self. This is not the small ego, which is merely the manager of conscious life. The self is a totality of consciousness and unconscious, the archetype of wholeness, the point of convergence, where all opposites in the soul can be reconciled. I often likened the self to a mandala, a sacred circle with an unchanging center. The mandala appears in dreams, in meditation, in alchemical art, and in religious symbols east and west. This circle is not merely an artistic image, but the language of the collective unconscious, an invitation to return to the deep center where the soul finds balance. The process of approaching the self often comes with crises and profound transformations, for the ego must relinquish its illusion of absolute control, accepting that it is only a small part of the psyche's life. This is the humbling of the small ego before the whole. Those lacking courage may fall into spiritual inflation, believing themselves to be God or a savior, instead of recognizing that they are merely invited to integrate into a greater order. In mythological symbols, this is the sacred rebirth, like Orpheus descending to the underworld and returning, like the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree finding enlightenment, or like Christ, whose death and resurrection symbolize the dissolution of the ego for new life to arise. In alchemy, this is the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, the perfect jewel formed when all elements have melted and united in the furnace of the soul. When approaching the self, one feels supported by a force beyond the individual, as if the entire universe converges within the soul. This is the experience of the numinosum, the sacred, that inspires both awe and reverence. And it is this experience that opens the ultimate meaning. The journey of individuation is not about becoming perfect by societal standards, but about becoming oneself in wholeness, a small being, reflecting the cosmos. When one has touched the symbol of the self, we often think the journey is complete. But for me, this is not the destination, but the beginning of a new spiral. Individuation is not a goal achievable in a single moment. It is an endless process, unfolding throughout life, and one might even say extending through generations in the collective unconscious. Individuation means harmonizing opposites, allowing consciousness and the unconscious to coexist in a dynamic relationship, not letting one dominate the other. One never fully grasps the self. We only approach it, then are pushed away, like planets orbiting a star. And each return takes us to a new orbit, wider, deeper. In my clinical experience, I, Jung, often witnessed patients who, after confronting and reconciling with their shadow, had to face another subtler darkness. This shows that wholeness is always ahead, like a mountain, where reaching one peak reveals another, farther off. This is why I call this process the opus contra naturam, a work against natural instinct, requiring persistent effort and fidelity to the inner path. In mythology, this is reflected in endless cycles, death and rebirth, the waning and waxing moon, winter followed by spring. In alchemy, this is the work of albedo and rubedo, white light and red fire, stages of transformation repeating until the raw metal becomes pure gold. Psychologically, this means every crisis, every dream, every life. Conflict is an opportunity for rebirth and drawing closer to the self. Individuation is also an invitation to transcend the illusion of isolated individuality. Through this process, one not only discovers oneself, but also connects with the web of the collective unconscious, where the memories, myths, and aspirations of all humanity reside. In this way, the growth of an individual contributes to the growth of humanity. Thus, the process of individuation is both personal and cosmic. It makes us become ourselves, but it also integrates us into the whole, like a drop of water finding itself, yet realizing it is an inseparable part of the ocean. When the process of individuation reaches a deeper level, one not only confronts the darkness, the masculine and feminine, or the collective unconscious, but also begins to touch another dimension, the sacred. Here, the psychological experience no longer remains confined to the individual psyche, but opens to a connection with the divine, a force transcending the finite ego. I, Jung, have asserted that religion, at its deepest essence, is not a system of dogmas, but a living experience of the numinose, the overwhelming feeling before a reality beyond intellect. In therapy, many patients, when approaching the self, encountered dreams filled with religious symbols. The cross, the mandala, the flame, or a guardian deity. These symbols are not hallucinations, but the language of the collective unconscious, indicating that the journey of individuation is always also a sacred journey. In Ion, I analyzed the image of Christ as a symbol of the self, not in a dogmatic sense, but as an archetype reflecting the harmony between humanity and divinity, the mundane and the sacred. Similarly, in the Red Book, I described encounters with mythological figures, Philemon, Salome, as embodiments of archetypes, guiding me beyond the limits of the ego. These images remind us that individuation is not a dry process, but a sacred ritual, akin to initiation rites in ancient traditions. in Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries allowed people to confront death and rebirth. In Taoism, the practitioner cultivates inner alchemy to become a true person. In alchemy, masters sought to unite spiritus and materia. All reflect one truth: the human soul, when approaching the self, also approaches the divine. But I also warn, when the ego encounters the divine, there is always a risk of misidentification. The ego may identify itself with the self, believing it has become divine, falling into the illusion of omnipotence. This is the arrogance of Lucifer, or the trap of false messiahs. Thus, I emphasize, humility is essential, recognizing that the ego is merely an instrument, while the self is the true center. This sacred dimension opens a new awareness that everyday life, with its small pains and joys, I can also be a place to touch eternity, a strange dream, a moment of contemplating a sunset, a meaningful encounter. All can become gateways for the divine to manifest. At this stage, the process of individuation extends into an endless pilgrimage, where each step is both a discovery of the self, a s'il prier, and a contact with a mystery beyond intellect. That path never ends, for it is life itself.